Warm welcome to everyone, each one of you, folks here in person, folks online. It's really beautiful to be able to practice here together. And hola, Claudia. Así que en este momento hay interpretación simultánea para los que desean elegir eso en el menú. Spanish interpretation is available. Only for the online folks, sorry. Beautiful. So, welcome again. And this is the Sunday Sounds of Dhamma. And as usual, our program is about 10 or 15 minutes of guided meditation, half an hour or so of Dhamma talk, and a little time in there for Q&A, reflections, questions, or corrections, or anything else that folks want to talk about. And in terms of announcements, the only one I would make is next week after the talk, immediately following the talk, we'll have a brunch. So we've been having the brunches about once a month or so. And next week, it turns out that is on Buddha's Enlightenment Day. So Buddha's Enlightenment Day is December 8th, according to the Soto Zen tradition, the Japanese Buddhist tradition. As I often say, in most of the early Buddhist traditions, Theravada and so on, is celebrated on Wesak, which is a day that happens in the spring, usually in May. And all the Buddha's birthday, his enlightenment day, and his death, his passing into nirvana, are all celebrated on the same day. But the Zen folks, maybe more opportunities for cake, I'm not sure why, decided to split it up. So we have this holiday in December. And there will be cake. So, and it's a potluck. Usually brunches are a potluck. All right. So other than that, you can have a look on the website about all sorts of other offerings. The first of the virtual art tours is also starting in a couple of weeks. So with that, we will go ahead and move into the meditation. If you haven't muted your mic, please go ahead and do so. Except for Claudia, of course, Claudia Gutierrez. But the other Claudia could mute her mic. And I think for this morning's meditation, what I would like to do is let's do a practice of elements. So the what are called the four great elements in Buddhism is a framework for understanding how this body comes to be, what the body is made of. And it's also a way of relating to the qualities of the body itself. So hopefully all of that will become clear as we meditate. So you can go ahead and begin to establish your meditation posture. I usually like to begin with just a bit of movement. Maybe rocking the body from side to side and front to back. And allowing the body to come into a balanced and upright position. Bones of the spine lining up. And with the bones carrying the weight of the body, and perhaps the muscles around the chest and the back can just soften and widen. If you want to lower the energy of the body, you can place your hands flat on your thighs. Or if you want to gather the energy and the attention together, then you can bring your hands together on your lap, forming an oval with your thumbs. Relaxing the belly and really allowing the settling of the body right here, right now. Now starting with the legs and the feet, just becoming aware of the weight of the body, the firmness of the body. We know that we are carbon-based beings, the earth element in every cell. And slowly moving the attention up the torso, aware of solidity, firmness. All the way up through the neck and the head. Just knowing earth as this body. Natural stability. One more shift to become aware of the earth element, the solidity beneath you, whatever your support is. Aware of that support, that stability beneath you. All right, friends, that brings us to the end of the meditation for this program. And we'll move directly into the Dharma talk. If you have questions or reflections on the meditation, I'll take those at the end. Mm. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So over the last few days, I have been out of town. I was visiting with my new son-in-law's family up in New Jersey, in a little tiny town called Branchville, New Jersey. And we had a good time. I've been over there a few times now, and his sister, so Kristen, has a 2-year-old girl, and so we were watching some TV that I wouldn't ordinarily watch. And we watched the Troll movie. It's a movie about those little dolls. Maybe everybody knows these little plastic dolls with their arms straight out like that, and their hair long, colorful hair, very small little dolls like this. All kinds of cool outfits or cool hair. Anyway, there's a movie about them. And the story is like this, just to tell it very, very briefly. There are these other creatures, not trolls, called the Bergens. And the Bergens think that the only way to be happy is to eat a troll. And the trolls escape, actually. And they go away for a while. And the Bergens are very sad, because they think that the only way to be happy is to eat a troll. Even though they have the opportunity for happiness right there with them in all sorts of other ways. And that's what unfolds in the movie, is that they come to realize, after much chagrin and shenanigans, that there might be some other ways to be happy besides eating a troll. And I thought, oh, this is a Buddhist movie. Nobody knew that, right? Because, in fact, I would go so far as to say that much of the Buddhist teachings, starting with the original Buddha 2,500 or 2,600 years ago or so, and all the way down through the centuries, is a teaching that we don't know how to be happy. We think we know how to be happy, and again, we make various mistakes about how to be happy. Even when the possibilities are right in front of us. So it's kind of a good news, bad news situation there. Right? If it's that simple, then why aren't we already doing it? And it reminded me also that a couple of weeks ago, so last week we had a special ceremony, and the week before that, I had been talking about these 5 qualities called the hindrances. the all-out pursuit of sense desire, ill will and aversion, restlessness and remorse, sloth and torpor, a kind of sluggishness, laziness kind of thing, and doubt. So these are 5 categories of difficult qualities, qualities that make it hard for us to really clarify the mind and observe the truths that are present in our lives. And the question came up, as it had also on the Friday night, actually. So why do we keep going back to these things, right? Why do we keep going back to these things? And so the Troll movie reminded me that I had promised to give a talk on that. On why is it? So I want to share with you a sutta, as I often do, or 2 or 3, a bit of a sutta. So the suttas are, the particular suttas that I'm teaching from today are said to be the oldest teachings of Buddhism. They are in those big tomes that you see back there in the library. And they were originally written down in Pali, centuries after the historical Buddha. So there wasn't writing in India at the time that the historical Buddha, the original person who found the path to enlightenment, was teaching. But it was carried as an oral tradition and passed on that way, and then they were written down, or so the story goes. So this is the record we have of the teachings of the historical Buddha. And this particular sutta, so sutta means a thread, actually, but we usually translate that word as a discourse or a talk. Because again, they were teachings that were given orally at the time. And this particular sutta is from the Long Discourses, so there are hundreds, actually thousands of discourses that have been written down over the 45-year period or so of the Buddha's teaching career, so to speak. And this is from the longer discourses, and so I won't go through the whole thing. We're just going to talk about a piece of it. And this is one of those suttas that feels like a legend more than like an actual recording of a talk. So y'all can decide for yourselves a little bit about this. There are various characters here to think about. But so the way that the sutta unfolds, and we're going to skip about the first half of it, is that at one point the Lord of the gods, or the king of the gods, comes to the Buddha to ask a question. So keeping in mind that this is India, this is ancient India, and there is very much a lot of this kind of teaching in Buddhism, that there are certain kinds of ways of existence that are ways of existence that are different than the human life, okay? So Saka is the ruler of the gods. You could say some kind of a heavenly being, like we might relate to it as Westerners as like angels. The Buddhism has this idea that there are realms with angels in them, so to speak, something like that. So Saka comes down and he asks this question. He says, even though angels and humans wish to be free from violence, wish to be free from hostility, wish to be free from hatred, they still engage in violence and anger and hatred and hostility. So what is it that binds them? So it's essentially the same question, right? It's like, what keeps us going around in these harmful states? Even more subtle harmful states. So those are some pretty strong words, right? Violence and hatred and hostility. But even you could say more subtle versions of unwholesome or unsavory qualities in the mind. And the Buddha responds by saying that it's two things. It's jealousy and it's stinginess. So jealousy, as in wanting what other people have, whether it's their stuff or their people or their place or their car or whatever it is. And stinginess meaning hoarding or protecting the stuff that you have. So it's a very interesting response because it has to do with generosity, the lack of generosity in our hearts. So it's a perfect topic for this weekend, I think. And in fact, there is a very specific practice that the Buddha gave, which he doesn't mention in this particular discourse, but that comes to mind immediately, which is the practice of mudita. Mudita is, we usually translate as like empathetic joy, having joy for other people's joy, right? And it's said to be a state, a quality that is boundless, that is limitless. And why would that be? Well, because if you're only happy when you get what you want, then you have a certain amount of opportunity for happiness in your life. But if you're happy when other people are happy, in wholesome ways, of course, not in unwholesome ways, but in wholesome ways, then you have many, many, exponentially more opportunities to be happy by resonating with other people's happiness. Now, again, it has to be their wholesome happiness. If they robbed a bank and they're happy about that, we're probably, hopefully, not going to resonate with that so much. But there is this way of starting to build up the possibility of feeling enjoyment about other people's enjoyment. That's one thing. And another thing is, then the Buddha, Saka goes on. Saka goes on to ask about the source of each one of these things. And this is a sort of structure that we see quite often in the suttas, that the Buddha will give an answer about some kind of qualities that relate to the problem. And then people will say, well, where do those qualities come from? And then where do those qualities come from? And where do those qualities come from? It's kind of unraveling it's kind of a deconstruction or a rolling it all back kind of situation. So after a series of questions, we see that the Buddha says something like, there are judgments that lead to this kind of proliferation of thought. So there's a Pali word for that. It's called papancha, this kind of spinning out. So something happens and then you have a reaction and then you have a reaction to your reaction and then you have a reaction to that reaction. And the whole thing sort of builds a whole head of steam, so to speak. That's papancha. And again, it can happen in very subtle ways or it can happen in more gross ways that we can be aware of. But he says that what happens is that when we have this kind of proliferation of perceptions, proliferation of reaction upon reaction, then that leads to applying our thought in a way that increases unwholesome desire. And it totally reminded me of a trip that I took on an airplane one time. So I fly a lot, and this was many years ago when I was traveling for business reasons. And there I was, sitting in the economy class seats, and it's a long flight, and I'm fine. I'm reading, my book or whatever I'm doing there. And, you know, there's nothing wrong with my seat or anything. But then the person next to me, across the aisle from me, started saying something about the people in first class. Like, oh, there shouldn't be a first class. Everybody should get all the same treatment. And look, they're getting special food, or they're getting special, drink or more attention or whatever it was. I forget what the person said to me. And then it was like that, right? Then I was like, the whole flight, I was looking forward up there, trying to see what kind of food they were getting, or what kind of, were they being served champagne up there in first class, or, you know? And why? I was perfectly content in my seat up until 10 minutes ago, right? But then there came this kind of papancha, this kind of proliferation of wanting or distinction judgments and then I was applying my attention to that. Oh, right. So what's going on over there, right? In such a way that is creating more and more inner conflict, right? Inner conflict. So it's even not really about what's going on in first class necessarily, or about what that person said to me. It's my own mind then, right? That is becoming a more and more uncomfortable seat to be in. So there's this way in which we can apply our attention in skillful or unskillful ways. And that is the crux of what's going on here. So the Buddha follows this last statement about the proliferation of judgments. He says, he gives us an example of a good way, actually, to apply our ability to judge or to discern. Right? So the Buddha's not saying we should just be, la-di-da and like not really making any kind of distinctions either. That wouldn't be a skillful way to go around with your life. But he does say this. He says, there are two kinds of happiness that you can discern if you're paying attention. There's happiness that makes your unskillful qualities grow, or there's happiness that makes your skillful qualities grow. So again, I go back to the troll movie, right? If you think that you are happy only by eating trolls, then that's making your unskillful qualities grow, right? That's not really the most skillful way to go about it. Especially if you have other alternatives, right? Other good alternatives. And it's an interesting way for us to think about it, right? That not all happiness should be pursued. But not all happiness needs to be rejected either. That's not what's being said, right? But that we need to know the difference. And I think also about, for example, like addiction, where there is this pursuit of what we think is bringing happiness without realizing the extent to which it's actually causing harm. Right? So you have to make that distinction. And until you're able to make that distinction, then you won't know to stop. You won't know how to stop. So very, very interesting. Happiness which is skillful and happiness which is not so skillful. In the same way that we talked about it with mudita, right? With the empathetic joy. There's some happiness in other folks that we see that might not be so skillful. We might not want to resonate with that or encourage that. But then similarly, the Buddha goes on to speak about sadness. And he says, oh, there's some sadness that is actually helping your skillful qualities to grow. And there is some sadness that is making your unskillful qualities grow. And I thought, oh, that's also kind of interesting, right? We don't often see the Buddhist teachings talking about sadness. That's not something that is very prevalent in the suttas, you would say. So sadness, which makes our unskillful qualities grow. I think we can relate to that, right? If we think again about the hindrances, things like a kind of sluggishness or sadness, which is caused by a lot of remorse, which has gone beyond the sort of acknowledgement of something gone wrong to actually creating a more harmful self-image. There are different ways that sadness can be harmful. That seems intuitively obvious. But sadness that could be skillful. Well, so there's one other sutta that comes to mind about that. But before that, I will also say it reminds me about some time that I practiced. So I did some training in Japan many years back. And that was when I was first ordained, mostly. I started there as a lay person, but then I was shortly thereafter I was ordained, and that was my early training. And, it was pretty uncomfortable. It was very uncomfortable at times. We had a practice in the wintertime of 28 days of going out on alms collection rounds. So you go out for about 3.5 hours without any mittens or gloves, without proper shoes on. You have only your socks and your rope sandals that we wove by hand. Whether there's a snowstorm or a sunny day, it could be quite uncomfortable. It could be quite uncomfortable. But I found that that kind of training really helped me to see how my stability, my inner contentedness, my inner happiness didn't have to depend on anything, on whether my body was comfortable or whether I knew the language or whether I had a choice about what I was doing that day. It didn't have anything to do with any of those things, whether I was miserable or contented. But the other kind of sadness that the Buddha describes as being a skillful kind of sadness, or one that leads potentially towards skillful qualities, is the sadness of not making progress in your practice. So this is an interesting one, and one that I always get a good laugh out of, because in the other sutta, so that's, I believe it's Majjhima Nikaya 121, Middle Length Discourse 121, where the Buddha talks about this. And he says, you have this feeling like, oh, when will I ever, it's not possible for me. When will I ever be enlightened? Or when will I ever have any states of peace of mind? That's never going to happen for me. Or I'm just wasting my time. Or I hear a lot of this. You never, you never know at what point folks might feel that way about their practice. And the Buddha interestingly says that that kind of distaste or that kind of sadness or that kind of like longing is actually one that could motivate you. You could be like, well, we'll see whether that's true or not, right? We'll see whether that's true or not. You could take it as a challenge. You could take it up as a challenge. So anyway, so to think about this, or maybe the sadness of being with someone who's sick or who's dying, that might be a sadness that's a very skillful one. To be willing to be present at those times and accompany someone on their journey. So there are different ways to think about that. But then he even says that about equanimity, that there are two different ways to think about equanimity. Equanimity that is skillful and equanimity that is unskillful. And that to me is always the most interesting thing, because ultimately the path, I would say, isn't about just happiness, but actual peace. In fact, an absolute peace, an unshakable peace. So how could equanimity be unskillful? I would say it's usually a mistaken form of equanimity, right? It's like, I don't care. That thing doesn't bother me because I don't care, because I don't let it into my world. Yeah. But I would go so far as to suggest that our ability to meet what is true about our lives is the most fundamental problem of a human life. Can we or can we not meet, be present for, acknowledge what's true about our lives? Because when we can't, then we're just dealing with our ideas. We're not even dealing with what's true, with what's real. We're just swimming around in our heads in that papancha, right? In that sort of reaction. But as soon as we get honest and authentic and sincere about what's true, then we have the possibility of a response. A true, authentic, sincere response. In fact, going back to the troll movie, now I hadn't planned to say this part, but going back to the troll movie for a second, that's part of what happens in the troll movie, right? That this young lady who lives and works apparently in the kitchen uses the troll's hair to pretend to be somebody else and to get the attention of the king. But then at some point, she has to stop that. At some point, she has to be herself. The one who doesn't have the pretty hair. And that's okay. So if there's one general lesson that we can learn from this, again, it has to do with really investigating, really knowing what is it that brings happiness. And that means, and this is one of the most beautiful parts, and that means that you know how to do that. I have absolute trust that you know how to do that if you try. And that's why we all walk the path individually. We all have a unique path to walk. The Buddha himself couldn't enlighten anyone. Certainly I can't. Right? You have to walk the path yourself. But you have the tools. You have what you need. I promise you that. It couldn't be any other way. You may have to stumble around a bit. You may have to stumble around. We all do. We all do. You have to make your mistakes. You have to be willing to learn from them. And we also have the support of the Sangha. And that's one of the most important things, right? We have the support of good friends who want to help us to see clearly, help us to see those truths of our lives. Those are your real true friends, whether they're here at Dassanaya or anywhere else in your life. But I would say, keep asking those questions. Keep looking closely. What is it that really makes you happy? And you'll find that behind that is what really brings you peace. Thank you. That's what I wanted to share with you today. Right. So, on that note, we have about 15 minutes or so, maybe slightly less than that actually, because I spoke a little long, for any kinds of reflections, comments, questions about the meditation or about the talk. You could disagree or agree. It's all open. Folks online or folks in the room. Yes, Stig, please.
Yeah, so
Oh,
had,
actually, sorry, Stig. I think that Fumio had her hand up first. So let's let
okay,
Fumio go first and then Stig could go next.
fine. Yeah.
All right, and also I noticed, Olivia, is my sound okay today?
Your sound is okay today. Great.
Good. When you said the word stumble, so I write poems a bit, and I'm very shy to read them, but this one was making fun of myself, and so it was written in response to Dogen's poem, and actually I had it open here, and it's a very beautiful one. He has about Cuckoo's song, and he's ending his poem with words, but do not ask me where I'm going, as I travel in this limitless world, where every step I take is my home. So this is Dogen,
Yes.
not me. Yeah, just to be clear.
Okay. Okay. And then you wrote one.
And a couple of months ago, I was reading it a few times, and then I was in a city with two bunnies that had like 4 kilos or so. And like I go on the street, I think there's some bad news, and I literally stumbled. And and actually it was in spring. I literally stumbled a bit, and then I had this haiku pop out in my mind. A spring city walk, day after day I stumble my way to enlightenment.
Yes, I read
And
that one on your blog, I think.
And it was sort of like response to Dogen's ones.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Okay, that's it.
Thank you for sharing that, Fumio. Thank you.
And read the
Wait,
Dogen's
say it one
one.
more time. Say it one more time, please.
The Dogen one?
No.
That's a better one.
Yeah.
All right, it's a spring city walk. Day after day, I stumble my way to enlightenment.
Excellent. I like it. I like it. Thank you so much, Fumio.
But I would recommend the Dogen's one. It's very beautiful on cuckoos.
Yes.
I don't know if it has a name. Dhamadipa, does it have a title?
I don't think he gave titles to his poems, actually.
No, okay.
Just dates. All right. Thank you. Okay, Stig and then Olivia.
Yeah. So I love the metaphor of stumbling and finding and recovering. But when you were talking about the pancha. I guess it has maybe a more refined aspect to it, but I don't. It seems to me as long as we're relating to the thought as just thoughts, like a sensation in the face or the wind, and it's nothing more than that. There's not a problem with any of that thinking that happened on the airplane. But and I know you're aware of that, but I'm just curious. It didn't come out in the talk for me. But I'm wondering, am I missing something? Yeah. Okay. Is there
Yeah.
something beyond just language itself can often be a problem. It generally is. Okay. But
Yes.
it's not a problem depending on how we relate to it. And so I just ask for some further comment on that. Yeah.
No, I think that that's the point of the reflection. It's not a problem except how we relate to it. So if we relate to it as something unpleasant,
Hmm.
right? That
Yeah.
perception that somebody else is getting better food up front or whatever, right? Then that becomes something unpleasant. And that, if you take that as the next thought to pay attention to and to have another unpleasant thought on top of that, then the difficulty becomes that you're not just letting it go, right?
Hmm.
You're sort of building upon that unpleasant Vedana, that unpleasant feeling tone, and spinning out beyond what's happening in your situation, right? So the other, and I think this has come up before sometimes, that a thought relating to a thought, that's very typical. And that can actually be a very skillful thing. That's one of the situations we often try to set up in practice, is to have one part of the mind observing another part of the mind, so to speak. That's a way of talking about it, right? But if you're only doing that, if you continue in that vein, then you're completely in your head. Then you become cut off from the lived reality of the moment that you're in.
Hmm.
Right? And you're just off, da 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 da, and you're off in some other dreamland,
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
that's one of the difficulties with that, papancha.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. Sure. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, beautiful. Olivia.
Well, I would like to come back to upekkha, equanimity, because that's in the last weeks I often thought of how could I nourish this more in my life. I needed more of that. And the keys I used, but maybe you have more skillful keys for me, is like acceptance, acceptance for a moment, and try to stay in the mind like, do I really know better, or do I really know what is right? Am I sure? So this is what I try to keep alive in my mind in those moments. But maybe there's more skillful ways or more keys where to start to find this acceptance with the situation. Yes. And maybe what was also, skillful for me was, so I'm very grateful for the meditation today. You look for this inner stability. So I try to come back to my body and to feel this earth element in me, this stability. So this is, I think it goes hand in hand, but maybe you have a different point of view on it, and another key for me.
Another key for Olivia. Okay, that could be the theme for next week's talk. Another key for Olivia. No, so Olivia, I want to say all of that, all of the things that you just mentioned there sounds to me like very skillful response, and like some ways that you could think about fostering the equanimity, right? Which is the body, right? Really allowing the body to be an anchor for the mind. Acceptance, just knowing that we don't have to be okay with what's here. We're not saying it's okay or not okay, but the ability to acknowledge what's here is a kind of acceptance that can very, very much help, right? And again, I think this question, coming back to this question of appropriate response, so I've talked a little bit about that koan. Maybe that koan would be the next topic for next week, although I already have another talk written for next week. But the not to get stuck in the questioning, right? Because equanimity, so if we think about, for example, the way that equanimity is described in the larger framework of the path, right? For the 7 factors of awakening, for example. So equanimity is one of them. And tranquility is also one of them. And people often say, well, what's the difference there? What happened? I thought that equanimity meant being calm, but actually not, right? So tranquility means being calm in body and mind. It means this way of finding that stability, finding that place of releasing anxiety or releasing, tension but equanimity is like finding your sea legs, right? Equanimity is being able to be present with many things and just be able to attend to them without being knocked off balance. So that's one of the keys to equanimity, in my view, is this ability to also move on. Okay, so there's this, and then there's this, and then there's this. And a good example of this is like folks who suffer from depression, for example. If you feel like sadness is always, always, always present, then I would say, well, maybe you could investigate that a little bit, because oftentimes, there's a little chink in the armor there, right? There's something joyful that does happen, or there's something even just plain neutral that happens. And your ability to acknowledge that is helpful in sort of not getting too bogged down. So that moment by moment, again, we can't always just move on to the next moment. Sometimes you need to refer back, right, and make a plan about what happened there. But even that is like the next moment. Okay, and then that plan is done, and like that. Hopefully that's helpful
It is.
reflection.
Thank you.
Okay, all right. And we're at the end of our time now. So is there someone who would like to make the announcement, or should I just move on to the dedication of merit?
I'll make the announcement.
Okay, thanks, Dana.
The practice of giving and receiving has been a part of Buddhism since its inception. Giving to Dassanaya Buddhist Community supports our guiding teacher, Dhammadipa, the physical location at the Vihara, and allows us to continue to offer Buddhist teachings in support of the awakening of all beings. Our support pages are on the website under the support tab. There are 3 sections: donate, volunteer, or offer material support. In addition, about once a month, we send an email communication about meditation classes and retreat schedules. You can subscribe on the homepage. Dhammadipa, thank you for such a wonderful talk. I think everybody, Buddhist or not, could find a nugget in that. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Dana. May we all find our nuggets. That could be the blessing today, but no, let's move on. All right. May the beneficial momentum that we have established with our practice today be of benefit to all beings everywhere, known and unknown, seen and unseen, beings close and beings far. That all beings might find their path to freedom from mental and physical suffering. That all beings might find their path to compassion and knowing the truths of their lives with wisdom. By the power of the Buddhas, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, and each one's efforts, may all beings be free. All right, dear friends.
Thank you. Thank you so much.